Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 19th chapter in the book of Acts. We made it all the way up until the 22nd verse. We're going to take this from the 23rd till the 44th, 41st, all the way to the end. But we just want to briefly review what we already covered in greater detail. This is the launching of Paul's third missionary journey. This is the third and final one that Luke records in his the book of Acts. And there's no mention of any missionary companion. So his first mission was Barnabas and John Mark, who departed, but they reconcile in the end. And then Silas is his mission companion in the second one. But what I just noticed rereading this time is that there's no mention of any companion, but there is a mention of Apollos, whom we met in the earlier chapter, the 18th chapter, who was a man who was mighty, an eloquent preacher, and a Jew from Alexandria whose knowledge was incomplete. It was only up until John the Baptist. So these sort of tent makers and Christian couple that Providence has placed Paul in Paul's path, take him aside and show him, they fill in the gaps of his knowledge. And that's much of what we meet in the original assembly, that Paul's third missionary journey goes to the city of Ephesus, which would have been the third or fourth largest city in the Roman Empire at this time. And so he meets a similarly ignorant people who have been baptized by water but not by spirit. Paul makes it, they didn't even know that there was such a thing, such a one as the Spirit. The Spirit is a person, not a thing. Often slip of tongue. But so Paul makes him miraculously manifest, and they're transformed instantly. What a difference the Spirit makes. Once a born-again believer receives the Spirit, they're taking off from there. So these men may have already been born again through baptism, but not baptized in the Spirit, which is, I feel, of greater salvific significance, absolutely essential. Unlike the water baptism, there are debates on both sides. I'm personally inclined towards the side which argues that it does not seal or secure one's salvation, but that's neither here nor there. Then we meet a mixed crowd of Jews and Gentiles and their mixed reactions. This would have been custom. The first place these early Christians would have preached would have been the synagogues and the temples. But as they're setting out and launching pads into Gentile territory, they invite and attract Gentile audiences into the Jews, and that seal or hardens the friction between them. But we read these Elohim worked unusual miracles through the hand of Saul, and all these diseases depart from his touch. And it's not through Paul, but the name. The name is the controlling element. The name is that of the Son, Yahshua Messiah, through whom these miracles manifest through Paul. And then we meet itinerant or roving Jewish exorcism who try to expel the demons in a demon-possessed person by saying the name Yahshua, whom Saul proclaims. And there's an interesting experience when the wicked spirit answers them, saying, I know Yahshua and I know Saul, who are you? And then suddenly the demon-possessed person turns on them in a violent expression of outrage, which, so they, far from conquering the demon-possessed person or healing him, they are in fact injured by him. And this spreads all throughout, and this incidentally spreads the witness. And we read of the growth in places such as the 18th chapter and the 20th verse, 18th verse and 20th verse. And then we read that Paul was here for a period of 2 years in somewhere in the range I just covered. I honestly neglected to miss it or mention it, but so a lot of people have a picture and a vision of Paul as a man constantly on the move. He was not always on the move, but he was always busy. He was not an idler. He was always getting the work done wherever he was. And he like a lot of evangelists today, he didn't have the luxury of doing hit and runs. He had to edify the places he evangelize, because without his knowledge and without his supervision and without his authority, there was a lot of false teachers creeping in and causing a lot of confusion in a lot of these places that Paul caused. And then in the 22nd verse, the mention of Timothy, who's mentioned more extensively than Erastus. These are two Christian companions of Paul's. We know a lot more about Timothy than we do about Erastus. But in the 23rd verse, where we're going to take the exegesis after our abnormally long preamble, and about that time there came to be a great commotion about the way. The way is Luke's term for describing what eventually became called Christianity as early as the 11th chapter and 26th verse. We read they were first called Christians, but they were known as Nazarenes. There was something distinct about them from the Jews who they worshipped, and they were by background, but they were followers. One of the way is the way, and so John kind of personifies the way in the form of the figure of who is the namesake of Christianity, Yahshua Messiah, the way, the truth, and the life. So the way is following him, and the way is a peacemaker, but is also a disturber. The world recognizes its own, and we are not of the world, so it vomits us out and rejects us whenever we enter into the world because it does not understand us. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, provided no little business to the craftsmen. So this Demetrius was a prominent local silversmith who made temples. The Temple of Artemis would have been located in this city. It is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, or was. It no longer stands, but they did have a magnificent temple at this moment in time, and for some time before and some time after, that revolved, which was an idolatrous practice. So we learned that he's in the money making business off this, and he is threatened because so many potential customers are going to Paul, who kind of forbids them from worshiping idols and calls them to an exclusivity of working. I stumble all the time. What are you going to do about it? I got a good thing going. I'm just going to keep it going. That's slightly embarrassing, but nothing to do. To Elohim and Yahweh and Yahshua in the Ruach Kadesh, and the pagans and Gentiles were accustomed to non-exclusive worship. Their system of polytheism and idolatry gave them a variety of gods for different reasons that they could pray to, that they could summon. They were mostly to appease their almighty wrath. But Artemis was a fertility god, so not only was her temple promoting idolatry, but immorality. There was loose and licentious sex practices that went on in these temples, and that is anathema to Christianity as well, who having called them together with the workers of the same said, "Men, you know that our wealth is from this business." So he's kind of a leader, or he at least is connected to every other person in his trade and industry, and he's drawing attention to what to him was an obvious fact at this point, that this man Paul is taking away our wealth because he's denying us of our customers, who's he's converting to this way, the way, which is causing such a disturbance in Ephesus while he's there. And you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a large number, saying that there are not mighty ones which are made with hands. So Paul's on his 3rd missionary journey at this time. He would have been no stranger. He would have been familiar to Asia. He went to Galatia in his 1st missionary journey. That was Asia is not the continent, but the province which corresponds to the modern country of Turkey, which would have been designated Asia Minor by the Greco-Romans. And but everywhere he went, he was telling these people, we read in the Thessalonians, turn from the lies of idolatry to the truth of Elohim in the 1st chapter, 9th verse, I think. So his message was one and the same, saying that there are no gods made with hands that are worthy of worship. I'll tell you the one who is worthy of worship, the one who made you with his hands, and he is an invisible creator of all that is visible, ergo his likeness or image cannot be represented through these idols that are kind of depicted to represent these imaginary deities, these figures of perverted imaginations made in the image of man, whereas we are told we are made in the image of Elohim in Genesis 1:26-27. And not only is this trait of ours in danger of coming to rejection, but also that the temple of the great female mighty one, Artemis, whom all Asia and the world worship, shall be regarded as worthless, and her greatness diminished. This was, as I earlier mentioned, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. This was a beautiful temple. It was a site that attracted tourists and visitors. It was something you had to see while you were in their town of Ephesus, but he's kind of aware of the fact that it's that he kind of appeals to them spiritually in a manipulative, subtle kind of way by saying this one who we work for, but we're really interested in what we can make from her money-wise, is going to be diminished, and we are going to be impoverished because she is diminished. So it's all about the money with Demetrius and basically all these others, because they made a lucrative living at one point. They had this wonder of the ancient world and all these idols to make to potential buying customers. Then Paul comes along, who's kind of disrupted the industry of his trade everywhere he goes in Asia Minor by this point, and Demetrius knows this. This is Paul's third missionary journey, so he's not a stranger. His reputation would have preceded him wherever he went at this point. And having heard this, they were filled with rage and crying out, saying, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." So they're not particularly concerned. They're not legitimately or sincerely worried for the greatness or the grandeur of this God they perhaps maybe believe in, but really are motivated to serve by making money. That's why they're attracted to this fertility deity, because there's a lot of buying customers. She has a beautiful world-renowned temple, and historically renowned temple. And the entire city was filled with confusion, and they rushed with one mind into the theater, having seized Gaius and Erastus, Macedonians, Paul's fellow travelers. So the uproar they cause creates panic, chaos, and confusion in the city, and what that does is stimulate a mall to move into a theater to violently seize some of Paul's fellow workers. We don't read of where Paul is yet, but we're about to. And Paul, intending to go in among the mob, the disciples did not allow him. So Paul was actually present and witnessing his fellow travelers who might have been more immediately available and physically proximate to the threatening crowd, and he wants to step in and physically intervene, but the disciples he's with do not allow him to do that. It's a risk not worth with no chance of any reward. And some of the officials of Asia, being his friends, sent to him begging him not to risk himself into the theater. So he had made friends. He was a winning, engaging personality. He was summoned and commanded to preach the good news to the Gentiles and their kings, we read in Acts 9:15. So he had a winning personality that made friends in high places wherever he went. And they were telling him the same thing that these disciples were telling him. They were telling him not to put your physical body in harm's way or life at risk, because this crowd is angry and they mean business. They are ready to tear these companions of yours limb from limb, so don't set yourself in the same fire. Then others indeed shouted this, and others that for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. So with all this commotion, the confusion does not clarify, but in fact enhances, because there's all these shouting voices, there's a mob prone to rage, and people are still in this state of confusion that this uproar kind of created at the pandemonium that really began with this cry for the dignity and integrity of the God they worship. They were careful to conceal their public declaration in monetary terms, as Demetrius did when motivating them, the ringleader of it all, to sort of start this riot. And and some of the crowd instructed Alexandrus, the Jew, putting him forward. And Alexandrus motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. So this Alexandros was a Jew, no mention of following the way or being a Christian or any inference, and he would have been, I guess, allied with Paul in his campaign against polytheism and idolatry, being a Jew by background. But having recognized that he was Jewish, with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." So this Jew is not able to make the defense that we can imagine was in the direction of Paul, or at least infer from the reading of the previous passage or verse. And so they don't let him. He's prevented physically, perhaps, from making his defense. And they repeat their mob mentality, and the larger the group, the stupider the crowd mentality is. And so they're able to, I've seen, all these protesters everywhere gathered for whatever reasons, just shouting slogans, and it doesn't impress me or persuade me to listen to what you have to say, but it is effectiveness and its reputation among perhaps stupider people than I could have said that differently, but I didn't. This is it. This is me. This is honest. This is real. This is unedited and extemporaneous. Okay, but and the city clerk, having calmed the crowd, said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is the guardian of the temple of the great female mighty one, Artemis, and that which fell down from Zeus?" So this Artemis, this most exalted of female deities, she was a female fertility deity who is somehow connected to Zeus. We're not entirely familiar with the interchange. We know the names and some of the powers of the Greek polytheistic pantheon. That's something we are not qualified to offer on the question. But in any case, this city clerk brings some sense of peace or some semblance of quiet to the crowd, at least. And he's telling them in more eloquent terms than the mob was perhaps capable of expression, that we of this city have a responsibility to maintain the dignity and integrity of our great female goddess, Artemis. Therefore, if these are undeniable, you need to be calm and do not act rashly. So he's at least trying to tell them that just because it's certain that they're not directly trying to dismantle their religion. Christianity is not against any one religion per se. It is virtually against more than them than it's not, because we have an exclusivity of way. And if you are going out and scattering and telling people that there is another way outside of the cross, then you are scattering, not gathering. But that's ultimately an irrelevant tangent. I do that sometimes too. For you have brought these men here who are neither temple robbers nor speaking evil of your female mighty ones. In other words, the threat that he posed was inadvertent and indirect. He did not come into their temple and loot them, and he did not say anything. He did not have a personal quash against Artemis. Artemis was, in Paul's eyes, equally non-existent and unworthy of worship as all the other idols. He had no personal vendetta against this Artemis, whom many of the Ephesians were conditioned by culture and education to esteem, but he had not gone in and literally looted their temple, and had not said anything personal about or against Artemis. If truly then Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. Let them accuse one another. So he's trying to restore law and order in a city that was, at least for 2 hours, in a state of pandemonium and chaos. He's telling this Demetrios that there are legal avenues. You don't have to incite a mob. You shouldn't be inciting a law, because we are a society of laws, and our laws provide courses that prevent the necessity of any mob mentality or riot or outbreak or outrage. So let their case be known. send these people home, think about what you have to say, and make it known to the proconsul. There is a right way to accuse, and there's a wrong way, and you are in the wrong. You're not doing it the right way. There's a more effective way to do this than, or a legitimate way to do this than the way you're currently doing, inciting a city of a mob or to a riot. There is another alternative option, and he's just reminding him of what he seemingly forgot. And if you have any further complaint, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. So this was an extension of the Ephesian legal protocol. There would be a regular assembly after the courts and the proconsuls. I guess that was the higher court. If a court advanced or attained any controversy or interest, they were sent to the higher echelons. For we are in danger of being accused of riot concerning today, there being no reason which we could give to account for this disorderly gathering. So he's telling them, even though you should bring your case to court, there is no case to bring because what you have done is unlawful and it is against our laws to bring public confusion, riots, and disorder, all for the sake, however noble or however sincere or however much integrity, and these people didn't have a whole lot of integrity. Their sincerity was feigned, but they had a cause which they concealed their true emotions from prudently in public, that Demetrius reveals in the earlier dialogue. It's all about the money with them, and he's telling them that you're welcome to take it to court, but you don't have a case. You've already undermined the moral high ground you could have claimed by provoking this unnecessary riot. And having said this, he dismissed the assembly. So this is the final verse, and this closes the case. He's dismissed, and Paul's work kind of continues in the next chapter, but we might pick that up on a later date. But for now, we just want to say that there was commotion and pandemonium. Even though we're called to be peacemakers, we are also, the word is a sword, which is a disturber of the peace. So that's kind of a paradox in balance we got to be mindful to maintain. There is a battle raging between us and the world. The world does not like us. The world does not recognize us. The world does not understand us. So they are determined to vomit us out of the earth, which they control with their own values and own systems and own laws and old ethics, which in a lot of ways are on a polar collision course with those of we who follow the way. So rejection is part of the evangelical duty. You have to embrace the rejection, and we're fortunate, at least in 20th century America, to not be as threatened. It's still possible to bring riots because these protesters these days are crazy. They're after everyone and anything that is a symbolic reminder of any unpleasant truth of their past they preferred forgotten. That's our present situation, but it was at the intervention of the city official. The disciples could not be saved. Paul could not save the disciples in this situation, and the Jewish one who was going to make the defense in Paul's case, or his defense in his case rather, is prevented from doing so. Then the city official steps in, intervenes seemingly decisively at the end of this chapter to go home. Your riot has not achieved its purpose. These men are not doing anything illegal. You may not like it, but you don't really have a case, especially when you just exhausted or expelled any argument for moral high ground by resorting to this unnecessary riot. This was an irrational response to something they found unpleasant, but the gospel, even like a lot of medicine, it heals, but it doesn't taste good going down. There are things that are heard said by us, by others, that's just going to offend them to the core, and that's something we have to deal with. But I hope you're here because you are committed to pay the price of spreading this word, and persecution comes to us in many forms and in many ways, but that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you soon. Take care till then. Bye-bye.